Hello. This slot was meant to be Alex Applin giving a really wonderful talk about gaming with chronic pain. Unfortunately, he's been ill. It's nothing too serious and he is on his way to full recovery, but it does mean he hasn't been able to record his talk. He does have a great article that covers some of the same material, which you can find at tinyurl.com/alexaplin. That's with two X's. It's ALEXXAPLIN. And you can throw him a follow on Twitter as well. Same again, Alex Applin with two X's, ALEXXAPLIN. So the upshot of that is that I'm afraid you're going to have to make do with me instead. I am going to present some material that was put together for an event recently run by the RNIB, which is the UK's main organisation for blindness and low vision. While blind accessibility for games is only just beginning to hit the mainstream industry in earnest, it isn't a new phenomenon. So I'm going to take you on a little trip through history. It's going to be a real whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it will still give you a sense of some of the steps that led to where we are today. I'll start that journey all the way back in 1971 with Opticon. Opticon consisted of a camera and a forerunner to the refreshable braille display. You could run the camera over some text, printed or digital, and have the light and the dark areas rendered out on a set of vibrating pins. This allowed blind people to play some of the basic games of the day, like the original text-based version of Lunar Lander from 1969. A couple of years later, in 1974, came Touch Me by Atari, which was widely credited as being the first digital audio game. It was basic audio pattern recognition, which was soon imitated by other companies, including the much more well-known game called Simon. On towards the end of the 70s, and consumer text-to-speech was evolving. In particular, the Votrax type and talk speech synthesis hardware for platforms like the Commodore VIC-20. Scott Adams, who was the pioneer of the text-adventure genre, actually added bespoke support for Votrax to a number of his games. The mid to late 80s saw the arrival of screen readers, software that could run alongside and interpret interfaces without that bespoke support. Software like Softvert, Flipper, Vocalize, Outspoken, and of course JAWS, which arrived in 1989 and is still going strong today. This was a bit of a golden age, not just for blind gamers, but low vision as well, as the technical limitations of the day meant that text games were still really common. And when games did have visuals, those visuals were large and they were high contrast. But as with other areas of accessibility, the march towards fidelity and complexity over the following years resulted in a narrowing of the breadth of humanity who were able to access it. On into the 90s, and 1996 saw the launch of Odyssey. This was an e-magazine for blind gamers that became a beloved community. Odyssey ran for 11 years and is fully archived on audiogames.net. A year later, in 1997, came a momentous occasion, the launch of Real Sound Kaze No Regret on the Saturn and later the Dreamcast. This audio game was the first console game designed with blind gamers in mind, even including instructions in Braille. And as part of his platform exclusivity deal, the developer of this game, a guy called Kenji Ino, insisted that Sega donate 1,000 consoles with copies of the game to blind gamers. Audiogames.net that I mentioned previously launched in 2003 and soon became the de facto hub for not just audio games, but all things related to blind accessibility of games. To this day, it is the largest community of not just blind gamers, but also developers of audio games, many of whom are blind themselves. The late 90s and early 2000s saw a whole range of small companies start up focused solely on audio games, like GMA, like PCS. But much of blind accessibility was, and still is, about homebrew efforts. From hobbyist coders through to the data-driven strategies and workarounds that blind gamers use to gain access to mainstream games. The Audio Games forums serve as a focal point for this, a place for people to come together and share knowledge and experiences. The audio games sector has been going since the days of the Apple II and is still vibrant today, with decades of learnings from those audio games that are actually applicable to mainstream games too. Both the audio games themselves and the audiogames.net forums in general are really invaluable resources for anyone wanting to consider accessibility for blind gamers. Also in 2003 came Terraformers, developed by Thomas Weston, who was actually also the founder of the RGDA Game Accessibility SIG. Terraformers was a 3D first-person game designed from the ground up to be fully accessible to blind gamers, featuring a wide range of accessibility considerations that are only just starting to appear in the AAA industry now, nearly 20 years later, in games like The Last of Us 2. 2009 saw the launch of the first iPhone screen reader. Smartphone uptake amongst the blind community was drastically faster than the rest of the population, because what accessible smartphones meant for independent access was truly revolutionary. And the touch-based interaction meant it was now actually possible for screen reader users to understand the visual layout of the screen as well. Games followed suit, with Apple Viz currently listing over 400 blind accessible iOS games. Also in 2009, Stevie Wonder was asked to present the Best Music Game category at the Spike VGAs, which are the forerunners of today's Game Awards. He used this platform to send a simple message to the industry. I want to see the companies that make these video games make them accessible, so that people like myself can enjoy them too. Sangre launched soon after, in 2010. This was an iPhone game that upped the bar for audio games in terms of both technology and production values. Binaural audio was used for accurate positioning of sounds in 3D space, even just through headphones. And there's also top-notch voice acting and sound design. The follow-up game, Nightjar, took that a step further, hiring Benedict Cumberbatch for narration duties. But as beloved as audio games are, there are many gamers who are not content with being relegated to the audio game silo. People who, quite rightly, want access to the same culture and the same recreation as the rest of society. 2012's Die Ontdekker was a big step towards this. This was an officially licensed Nintendo Wii game designed for blind, low vision and sighted kids to play together. Around this time, in 2013, usage data started to surface. An iOS MUD client called MudRammer made its interface blind accessible and tracked data on its use. 10% of its player base at launch, rising to 16% soon after, were using screen readers. The app cost $5 and the work took a single day, meaning instant profit for the developer. And the developers of another iOS game called Solara saw a different kind of data. They found that their blind players played for much longer and spent much more money on microtransactions than any of the other players. Those were their whales. Both of these games were seeing impact of the same thing, catering for an underserved audience for whom supply simply did not match demand. A huge landmark arrived in the same year. Fighting games were already popular with blind gamers. We'd already seen by this point Ed Boon, creator of Mortal Kombat, beaten at his own game by a game without any sight called Bryce Mellon. The mechanics and the sound design of fighting games, just having to locate two objects along a 2D plane and tell what they're doing, are by default usually enough to allow blind gamers to play at tournament level. At one of these tournaments, the Mortal Kombat team met blind gamer Carlos Vasquez and asked what they could do to help. He told them about an issue with their current game, Injustice. How blind players couldn't tell when they were stood in front of interactive background elements like the one in the screen. The developers then patched in an option to add audio cues for those objects. So when Superman is stood in front of the Bat computer and you have to smash him into it, it plays an audio tone to let you know. This was the first time that a AAA game had taken blind gamers into account. In the following year, 2014, another mainstream fighting game called Skullgirls took this a step further, with fully screen reader accessible menus. Just a couple of days' work and he'd upgraded his game from just accessible gameplay through to a fully accessible end-to-end experience. But this generally wasn't an option for developers. Most developers are wholly reliant on engines to handle their UI rendering, and engines, including Unity and Unreal, which between them obviously account for the vast majority of game development, did not support screen readers or any form of text-to-speech. In 2017, this began to change with the launch of the Unity Accessibility plugin by Michelle Martin. This was an epic undertaking to sidestep the issue by creating an equivalent to iOS's screen reader within Unity, building that entire screen reader experience with all the custom gestures and everything. It was an incredible feat, but not ideal or sustainable, and one that shouldn't have had to happen. Engines need to be handling this themselves rather than third parties having to resort to workarounds. And that is now, finally, beginning to happen. And here we have Stevie Wonder again in the background here of a piece of legislation being signed into effect by Obama back in 2010. This was a piece of legislation called CVAA, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. The games industry was initially given a waiver from this legislation, which expired in 2019. CVAA requires chat functionality, so like text chat, voice chat, and any interface that you need to navigate to and use it to, amongst lots of other things, be fully accessible to people who have no sight. It's exactly the same legislation that spurred accessibility of the consoles themselves a few years prior. This legislative requirement created a monumental shift in both awareness and implementation, with studios across the AAA space in particular investing heavily in technology solutions that would soon go way beyond compliance, not just that part of communication, but actually accessible interfaces in general, rapidly spreading over the following years. And then the next year, 2020, there was a breakthrough in the other side of blind game accessibility, the gameplay itself. The Last of Us 2 launched, the first AAA game to be designed from the ground up to be accessible following years of R&D with blind gamers. This benefited the game's audience. It benefited PlayStation in general, with blind gamers literally buying PlayStation 4 consoles just to play this one game. And it benefited the whole industry, acting as an incredibly high-profile showcase of how complex 3D games can be made blind accessible. Due to the timescales involved in AAA development, it is taking a bit of time for the impact of that to be felt, but there are many other AAA studios who have been inspired and are now making their own progress in the same direction. And PlayStation in particular have now publicly stated their ambition for all of their first-party games to meet a high standard of accessibility by 2025. So if you are a AAA dev and you aren't thinking about this kind of stuff now, you're going to be falling behind. Not just others in the industry, but falling behind player expectations too. That takes us up to now. What does a post-Last of Us 2 world look like? Well, it looks like the Last of Us 1 remake for a start, which you're going to be hearing about shortly. It also looks like a still robust audio game sector. It looks like mainstream cited games that are blind accessible, like As Dusk Falls, like Lost and Hound, with lots more on the horizon from indie to the AAA. Mainstream games are being modded for accessibility, from Crusader Kings to Stardew Valley to Hearthstone, providing ever more examples for mainstream developers to learn from. Audio description, which is an additional narration track to describe visual action, is spreading like wildfire through trailers for games and starting to appear in mainstream games themselves too. So, after 50 years and tireless advocacy by vast swathes of people, we're finally starting to see that pace of change accelerate. The appetite is there from blind gamers, and devs are beginning to understand the market and what is actually involved in making games accessible to blind players. So, what is missing? Which pieces of the puzzle do we need to put in place? That is a question that is incumbent on all of us to answer. And in doing so, bring games closer to their full potential. And last, just a couple of links that provided some of the content and the images for this talk. oneswitch.org.uk/page/museum and tinyurl.com/GA-HIST. So I hope that was interesting. Again, apologies, it's not Alex Applin, but again, check him out on Twitter, ALEXXAPLIN. Thanks.